and let Becky share a little bit about what she does with History Day and how she implements it in her classroom.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Happy to see you. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, I'm still at school. We start tomorrow. And, you know, as all school districts always do, the day before you start the new year, they tell you all these changes that you have to do differently. So I'm a little frazzled. I apologize, trying to do seating charts for each class so that we can track and trace any exposure to COVID. Okay, so I do National History Day as a required class project. I think I am the only teacher in metro schools that does it that way, and I might be the only teacher in metro schools that actually participates in National History Day, sadly. I used to have a lot more teachers do it. But I teach 7th grade world history, and our focus is the years 500 to 1500. So it does present an automatic challenge for my kids, particularly in trying to find those primary sources from those time periods. So I have to chunk the whole process down. So I provide the kids with a calendar of what the project will be like, including different due dates, so that I don't want them to feel overwhelmed by me giving them a packet. Okay, this is all going to be due on such and such date. You have to make your presentations in November. Good luck, have fun. Got to break it down. And I'm going to try to share my screen. It's been a while since I've done Zoom. They made us do Teams. Are you seeing anything on your screen? Nope, just me. Okay. I appreciate your patience. I make them an information packet. Here we go. Sorry. I'm going to show you the packet that I created the last time the world was normal, which was 2019. That's when the theme was breaking barriers in history. So at about the 3rd or 4th week of school, I give them this packet. And you can see, and I teach all the 7th graders. I'm the only 7th grade social studies teacher. So I have 175 students. Because I have 175 students, there's no way I can allow them to do individual projects. So I have them do it as a group project. And National History Day defines group as 2 to 5 students. So I require them to do it as a group. They form their own groups. They choose their own topics. And you can kind of see how it's broken down in that process here. I begin with our encore teacher, our gifted ed teacher. She comes in and does a lesson on thinking of recipes or thinking of research as a recipe. Well, how do you do a dinner party? Well, do you just magically have food appear like in Harry Potter with the house elves? No, you don't. You have to have the process. You have to know the ingredients. Research is exactly the same way. What are the steps in that process? So that's how we started off. We don't even mention NHD at that point. And then you can see we go to the library and have a lesson on what are research tools, the databases that are available, that are peer reviewed. How do you find those databases? What kinds of information can you find there? We don't actually mention National History Day until September. What is it? That's when I will use the National History Day resources, the introduction to what it is. And if you go to the nhd.org website, they do have videos there or links to those videos on YouTube that you can use as an introduction, not only to the program of National History Day, but this year they've also got what is diplomacy? What does it mean to debate? Those are also 2 videos that are available on nhd.org right now. So those will be what I show in September. And as I said, I have the kids do their projects in groups. And I do not put those groups together because I don't want mamas and daddies coming to me all mad and angry. Well, why'd you put my child with this student in this group? So they have to interview each other. They have to come up, they rank their, the skills they think are most necessary in a group that they would like to see. Maybe someone who's good with design. Maybe they want someone who's good with research. Maybe they want someone who's good, with different strengths. And they interview one another. and they form their own groups. And this is so cool to watch because they do this after having interviewed, they review their notes, and then they form their groups silently. They move into those groups silently. And believe it or not, 7th graders can actually do that. Then once they have formed their groups, I have them create a contract. How are you going to resolve problems and issues that might arise? So what norms do you have for working with one another? And they will actually have to turn that contract into me. Because I do this as part of a class project, this will count as 4, maybe 5 different summative grades. Let's see, so the group contracts, strengthening your writing. I collaborate with the literacy teachers here. We will analyze the theme. What does that mean, debate and diplomacy? What are we talking about? So we'll dive into the theme using the graphic organizers that NHD has provided. Then they will actually look at our standards for 7th grade. They will see which standards tend to jump out at them as having connected to debate and diplomacy. So that gives them an idea of what to look for when they go to the library, when they start researching, looking for topics, looking for sources, looking for databases, looking for books that could help them explore their topic that they think they're interested in. And you can see they have to turn in their final topic. Throughout this process, I'm conference with the groups, and I cannot do this by myself. I do have the gifted arts teacher, gifted ed teacher that helps, as well as the librarian. So we're a trio, a partnership that do the conferences, not telling the kids what they did wrong, but what do you think you could do to strengthen this topic? How do you think you can make it fit the theme better in a more direct way? So just kind of coaching them along, being the guide on the side. They had to turn in their final project category. There are 5 categories in National History Day. I do not allow them to do individual papers unless I have a student who just does not play well with others. Then that would be the only way I would let them do a paper. But they have to turn that in, and they have to think about this. What are your storyboards for it? How are you going to make this look? How are you going to divide it up? We do a lesson. The librarian will present a lesson on actually creating the annotated bibliography, citing the sources and what you need to include in that annotation. And I will say that is the biggest challenge for 7th graders because they've not had to do an annotated bibliography. And I keep trying to tell them it's just a big $10 word, fancy word, for taking a note. How did you use that resource? And you can also see on the calendar here, they turn in a draft of their process paper. I provide feedback on that draft, and then I will hand it back to them, and I expect them to make the corrections, the changes, address those comments in their final version. So I do not take a grade on the draft of the process paper other than did you turn it in? So that would be a homework grade, right? They have days to refine their work, their projects. And then you can see here, there are 4 days of presentation. And because I have all 7th graders, I'm on an A day, B day schedule. So I have 2 days for presentation for my A day classes and 2 days for B day. And I contact area museum professionals, historians, professors. I used to work at the Tennessee State Museum. So fortunately, I do have a lot of those contacts. But even if you don't, you're thinking, well, I don't have any of that. I can't do that. All you have to do is call and ask or email. The worst they'll say is, oh, I would love to, but I'm busy. They won't bite your head off is what I'm trying to say. So don't be intimidated by that if you think, oh, well, I don't have this resource. I didn't either when I first started. And then you can also see on this calendar from 2019 and 20 that I have the regional competition there. And in the rest of this packet, write down the theme. This is what the theme is, because I fully intend the parents. This is more for the parents than for the kids. But this is what your child will be doing. They'll be choosing a topic in a project category. This has written components, the rules. I have the link where they can access the rules. Grading criteria. So just a simple rubric. And this came from National History Day. There was a resource guide for middle school teachers that was available, and I still use this. I've tweaked it to make it work for my kids. But you can see I have a bibliography for a rubric for the bibliography, the process paper, and for the content itself contained within the project. I also have my students do peer evaluations, and that does count as one of their summative grades because that is part of their SEL work, collaboration, part of the social studies process skills, working with others. So they give each other ratings, and those ratings are averaged up to give them a grade. How to create a process paper here, information about annotated bibliography, student work. I have it here. All work should be done by the students, not the parents. I work at a magnet school. Parents tend to want to be very involved. So I focus on that. It's not the parents' work. And I will stress that on our back to school night. I also offer students times to work after school in my classroom because I'm here anyway, right? Because I'm not the type of person that walks out at the end of the day at 3:15. I'm usually here until about 4:30 anyway. So I allow my students to stay after school. They can sign up and work. You can see the times here, 3:15 to 4:15, but they have to sign up in advance. So I will give them a calendar of those available dates where they can sign up for. And I also try to include a couple of Saturdays. You can see I just have what, 1, 2, 3 Saturdays that I had for the last time. And again, they have to sign up in advance. So I will know who's coming and who all to plan for. So that was the packet for the last time the world was normal. Normal, I don't even know what that is anymore. But the kids, at the end of the year, I have them do an evaluation of the process. Of what did you think of National History Day? What do you think Mrs. Berner can do to improve it? Because I'm constantly gathering feedback on my own practices and my own processes. So that has been used. I've used that to kind of change the way I do things in class and try to make things more doable for kids. So I'm always open to feedback. And the first time I did this as a class project, it didn't necessarily mean it was perfect. It was not. So it's just one of those things. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. You just got to jump in. You just have to jump in and start it. And when I first started National History Day, I was not at this school as a classroom teacher. I was a museum instructional designer, consulting teacher at other schools. And we did it as a club there. So we gathered those kids who were interested in doing above and beyond and worked with those kids in a club-like setting. So I have done it both ways, but I feel that doing it as a class project, the kids really get more out of it. It's not just content lessons, focusing on content. These are life lessons. How do you research? Why do you need to back your ideas up, your opinions up with evidence? We really could have used that in the past year and a half, 2 years, right? Backing our things up with evidence. So it's really a very powerful experience for the kids and one that they will definitely remember. Now, yes, it does cause stress as a class project, but again, that stress is something that they are going to learn how to handle. They're going to learn how to resolve any conflicts that they have with their group. So there are all kinds of bonuses, benefits to participating in National History Day. And I encourage all of you, just consider it, try it, jump in. Head first. It's okay. And if you run into a problem along the way, don't hesitate to reach out to any of the educators that are on this panel tonight, because we are here to answer questions or try to help you think through situations as they arise. So that's kind of my presentation in a nutshell. I hope that was helpful. And I'm trying to figure out how to stop sharing my screen. Again, I apologize. I've been doing Teams for the past year. I can't even get this to not be minimal.
You should see a red like button at the bottom that says stop sharing.
Yeah, I can't even, okay, it's at the top. There we go. Stop share. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think hearing not only a middle school teacher's perspective, but also a world history teacher's perspective is very useful, because I taught sixth world, and NHD can be challenging for those ancient topics. So it's definitely you're taking on a lot. So thank you for sharing that. Rebecca, are you ready to share?
Sure. And I don't actually have anything to screen share. So, but I would tell you guys, if you have a question that pops up, something you want to know, please feel free to type it into chat, and Nikki and Corey are going to, kind of make sure they read those to me. So, anything you want to know, feel free to ask as we go through it a little bit. So, I do National History Day as a club, and I have been doing middle school. I just recently moved to high school, but I had actually been doing NHD for middle school and high school for a while, because as my middle schoolers moved up to high school, there wasn't a high school teacher who was doing NHD. So I've kind of, like, this past year, I had 6th graders through 11th graders kind of all working on NHD together, which is kind of nice, because you get the benefit of those older, more experienced kids being able to help the younger ones along. So you get that, which has been useful for me, definitely. So if you're going to do this as a club, the first thing you really want to think about is how much time you can devote to this. Like Becky showed you, she stays after school and does some Saturdays. If you're doing this as a club, it's most likely going to be after school. So you got to think about, what do you have time for? How often can you do this? So I was really lucky at my middle school. We had an after school grant program. So I actually did get paid for at least part of the hours that I put into it. But that also came with some different requirements of things we had to do because I was part of the grant program. So that had its pluses and its minuses in terms of that. But with doing it as a club, you're probably going to want a chunk of about 2 hours. It's hard to really get a lot of instructing done and the kids to have much time to work on stuff, if they're only staying an hour after school. So my kids were, 3:15 to 5:15. So that's, something to think about. You could try doing it in a short amount of time, but I found the 2-hour chunks kind of work best for us. And then we did it 2 days a week. This year, since I've moved to high school and I'm going to have more high school students, fewer middle schoolers are going to be participating for me. So I'm going to probably do one afternoon a week, and then some mornings kind of as needed if I need to do that for some of the kids. But that has worked out really well for me, doing it club-like in the past. One thing that I would say as well, a couple of tips, since my county has given everybody Chromebooks, my students who are doing group projects and even the ones who are working individually, we have been able to really collaborate a lot and also work, weekends, nights, snow days, because we're basically building everything in Google now. We're using Google Slides, we're using Google Docs. And so that has really been super helpful for us. So whatever system, because I know every county is a little bit different, but whatever kind of technology you're using, definitely make sure your kids know how to use those collaboration tools so they can share stuff with you, so you can help them. They can share stuff with their partners, because that's really going to maximize your work time. In East Tennessee, we get a lot of snow days sometimes. I don't know how the rest of the state, if you guys get quite as many as we do. And so being able to do stuff like, share Google Slides and such has saved our lives a few times in terms of getting projects done over a few days. So that's something that I would definitely advise you guys to do. And then I also really like Moodle tools. Becky talked about one of the challenges, especially for younger students, is the annotated bibliography. And there's a lot of those online kind of easy bib or whatever that you can go to, but they're not always the greatest. And those, I don't think the kids learn as much about how bibliography actually works because it kind of does it for them. Noodle tools, they still have to find all the information. So if it's a book, they've still got to look and find their info and type it in. All it really does for you is the formatting, which is the most annoying point of any kind of bibliography. I mean, I hated doing those when I was a student and I had to just like go by my Hargrave's handbook and, you know, sit there and type it all out with colons and commas and whatever else. So Noodle Tools kind of takes care of that for you. And it also lets students collaborate and do this kind of things. It isn't free, but it's pretty reasonable. So I think it's something like $20 or $25 a year. You can get an account, and then you can actually have multiple projects under the same account. So I have students that have had, you know, they have all of their NHD projects for 2 or 3 years are all kind of saved in there because they can just add another topic in there. So that's another thing to consider if you are going to do this as a club. Are the kids going to have to sort of come up with all of their funding, or, you know, is the school going to kick in some money? You know, how are you going to fundraise? You know, how are you going to get the money for that? Because if you decide to go with Noodle Tools, there's an expense there. And then things like producing the exhibit boards, coming up with costumes if you're doing a performance, you know, those kinds of things can run into some expense. So you kind of have to think about that. And I would say just if you're starting out, you might want to try to, especially if you're doing a club and you're only starting with a few kids, you may want to try to get everybody to start with one type of project. So like maybe you do all exhibits your first year, or maybe you do all websites. I'm going to be honest, I'm not great with the new website builder that NHC has put out there. So I had a group that did that last year, and it was very challenging for us to figure that out. But it's a little bit easier if you're only kind of working on 2 kinds of projects. I have had some years in the past where I had exhibits and websites and performances, and that's a lot to manage. It's a lot going on, and so if you're wary about getting started, maybe limit your kids to 1 or 2 types of projects till you get your feet a little bit wet, and then that will help you out just a little bit. So, oh, and I saw that Web Central is maybe getting some tweaks, which would be excellent. I'm going to be honest, there were a few days when I was very frustrated with Web Central back in the fall, and yeah, so tweaks would be excellent for that. It's not bad. I think I'm just not technically savvy enough to really understand how that all works. So,
Rebecca, you were not alone. So I think that they heard that from other educators, and hopefully it'll be a little better this season. But we will see.
Yeah. So, anybody have any other questions? Anything you want to question about the club approach that I haven't covered?
Yeah, so go ahead and feel free. I don't know if Rita's going to be able to make it this afternoon. So if you guys have whatever questions you guys have, feel free to either put that in the chat, or you can unmute yourself if you would like to share. I was curious for both of you. I know, Becky, you shared some of the resources that you use. But Rebecca, is there anything you like absolutely have to have for your kids as far as whether it be mapping out the schedule, or do you just kind of take it week by week and guide the kids that way?
I typically do give them a timeline. So only a few times have I had enough students that I needed to have a school contest in order to determine who could go to regional. I usually don't have that much overlap between like my grade levels and my project categories. So we usually work all the way up until whatever our deadlines for regional are. So whereas like Becky's finishing up in November, like our regional is the first of March. So my kids are usually working up until at least the 1st of February. And in the past with exhibits, they've worked all the way up until, to be honest, the day before. Sometimes we are finishing up. So, but yeah, I do usually give them a timeline for that. And I usually also make them read the rule book pages that pertain to whatever their project is. I try to make sure that I'm making them be responsible for knowing the rules. Like obviously I check their work, I help them, But if it comes down to it and, there's a rule infraction, I want them to understand that that's their responsibility. And I'm very pleased with the new rule book. I think the new rule book has a lot more guidance on things that has been a stumbling block for us sometimes, like when you're doing word count. Is every single word count, and how do you count this? And so there's some really good examples in there that were very helpful. And I also really like the new guidance they gave on how to do the annotations, which is very helpful because I'm going to be honest, we had done some very long annotations in the past. And so I think it's nice that they've given us more guidance on how they want that to look. And I really like those new rubrics as well. So that's another good tool to give those to your kids and let them kind of judge their own projects, talk about what that means, because it breaks down things a lot more than the old rubrics did. So those are all very useful tools.
Yeah, you mentioning the rule book and making sure the kids are aware of their infractions. I do like that educators have access to the rubric right now. So you could look, I will say they're also making some tweaks to the rubric because of the feedback we got from you guys this past year. This was the first year with this one. And some of the language and some of the criterion was just a little finicky. So they made some edits and hopefully it's more clear for all learners. And so the new ones, the Padlet I just shared is the toolkit. Everything that Becky and Rebecca have mentioned are on here. So rubrics, rulebook, theme book, NHDs, really helpful teacher resources that they have broken out by grade level. But the rubric actually has the rule infractions. So having kids self-edit and make sure that they can mark, don't mark any of those on their own work, I think is really, any of the work you can make the kids do themselves and have that level of autonomy, but also responsibility, I think makes them not only more invested, but it saves you a little bit of brain space too, hopefully. All right, so what other questions might you guys have? I was also wondering, when do you let your students decide their categories? As a kind of NHD veteran, both of you, do you let the kids make that decision towards the front end? Is that something they do later? Where in your timeline does that fit in?
For my kids as a class project, when they are discussing their topics, I have them, all right, now think about how you can best present your research on this topic. Is it going to fit an exhibit? Is it going to be better as a documentary? It's based on what their resources are, what their sources are, and what they think they could incorporate into a actual visual product. So that's towards the beginning of the process when they're thinking about that topic.
And I'm kind of similar. Sometimes my kids actually pick the type of project they want to do first. And then we end up looking at a variety of topics. And so then we narrow down our topic to, well, what topic is best going to fit this type of project you want to do. For example, I have some students who are going to be competing as, high school seniors this year who have been competing since 6th grade. They have done exhibit every single year. They've done group exhibit every single year. And, we discussed the possibility of changing to a different category. And they were like, no, we've done it. We've got experience. We know what to expect with this. Like, we want to build on those skills we already have. So, whenever they're looking at projects or whenever they're looking at topics, they look for a topic that they know is going to work for them. So, it just kind of depends on where. And then I have had also kids who come into it with, I'm going to make a website no matter what. And so we just try to pick a topic because I'm doing it as a club too. Like, I give my kids free reign in terms of their topic, as long as we can see how that it fits with the theme, which is much easier because we tend to get a lot of like 20th century US topics. because that, you know, gets around some of the problems with sources. I have had students do world history projects, but that is very tough, especially with primary sources. So it can be done, and it can be done really well, but it can be much tougher. So since we're doing the club approach, I usually end up with U.S. history topics, and usually they're 20th century U.S. history topics. So sometimes a little earlier, but for the most part, 20th century.
Yeah, I do think as kids get older, it's easier for them to know what's going to make a good exhibit board, what's going to make a good documentary. And also they've developed their own interests at that point. They know I do not want to do a website. I hated that last time I did it. I want to do something else. So giving them the autonomy to pick their category, I think is really one of the kind of magical things about NHD is that they're getting to choose how they relay their historical research. But making sure that they are understanding those bits and pieces along the way. I'm glad you mentioned annotated bibliography earlier, because I do think that the questions that they lay out as a new NHD educator, making sure you look at, they need to be answering with their annotated bibliography, how did I use this source? How did this source help my research? And not just writing, this source is a picture from, you know, they don't need another bibliography. They should have seen all of that in the project, right? And understanding that the first thing the judges, if we are talking about students that are going to competition, the first thing the judges are encouraged to do at every level of the competition is read the process paper and read the annotated bibliography. That is their first introduction into the student's work. So making sure that the kids don't just like run through that annotated bib to get to their exhibit board as they are proofing things, you know, make sure they spend time proofing their process paper and their annotated bibliography, because, you know, the exhibit at the end of the day, their project stands alone, whether they get to talk with a judge or not. And that process paper is a conversation with the judges. So making sure that they pay attention to those bits and pieces too, because they're not as much fun as the documentary, and we know that. But they are important. I was wondering if Lisa had anything she wanted to share as we're sitting here.
I just love listening to how Rebecca and Becky both work this into their classroom. There are no two History Day classrooms or schools that are exactly the same. That's one of the things to realize is, like Becky said, just jump in. And I think Rebecca would say the same, just start. Because one of the things you'll find in your first year is part of it is you getting the grasp on the rules and regs, so to speak. And after your first year, you'll feel more comfortable with that. And, you know, it's a developing thing for you too. So I know we work with schools in East Tennessee, and Rebecca knows folks here, even in Sevier County, that do it. Multiple grade levels, almost a whole middle school will do it. And then a lot of folks will just do it with their one class. As a club. So just think about what works best for you. But one of the things I really want to stress, going back to the process paper, there are questions the students answer in that process paper. And so many times what we see when we see a project for the first time, like if we go out to a school for a school competition or even at regionals, you can look at the whole project and not really get a sense of what, like if you were to just look inside the kid's head, what are you really thinking about this? What are you wanting to say about it? That's their voice. You can look on the exhibit or the performance, you know, watch the performance, and you don't ever get a sense, well, what do they think? What are they really getting across? But then you'll read the questions they answer in their process paper about, used to it was just as straightforward as how my project relates to the NHD theme. And it would be right there, but they didn't do it till the end of their project and never took it and incorporated it. So it really is a process. So introduce them to all these aspects. And that's great ways to give grades or give feedback or give reward, allowing them to kind of encounter and express themselves at every point with you verbally or in writing, and say, I really want to see inside you. What are you thinking? Because that's where the kids really grow the most. Their project may not be incredibly, it might not be the best looking or the swankiest, especially at school or at regionals. So what you're really looking for is that potential with those students that do well. So you can do things in the classroom and give everybody reward and recognition. But then when you're thinking about the students to reward with going on to competition, number one, make sure that they're interested in doing that. And number two, that gives you the opportunity to recognize some of the students that have done really some good work in your classroom. And maybe they just need some support in, helping them with the looks and the presentation. That's the thing I think that's great about History Day, is it really rewards students' thoughtfulness, their expression. They really learn a lot in how to think about and how to communicate things, especially through different layers of competition or working at different grade levels. So if you can involve, I know teachers that have really enjoyed and grown with this, they will have folks in their building or folks in the county, in their district, that are also doing it. And they might not collaborate directly, but just having that feedback. And so you feel like you're growing with it. And if you're in the same building, have someone at a different grade level to kind of begin this expedition with you, so that the students really learn a lot that first year, so that they have the opportunity to compete the next. But every piece to this puzzle has potential for you and the students. Communication is just really important. Finding ways that the kids can put it in their words, in writing. It can be in drawing. I mean, just all kinds of ways. So have fun with it. You may look at projects when you get to the point where you're trying to make a decision of, one of the things I will point out is there are limits at the different district and regional competitions. So if you choose, like your first year, to do, everyone's doing like group exhibits, the reality is only 2 of those projects is going to be able to advance, probably. And so that's one thing to think about, is if you have a team, I mean, if you have a club, then it gives you, there are fewer kids, but really celebrate if you do it at the grade level at school, celebrate that experience, make it a lot of fun. It's about, and a lot of the kids will just want to do well in class. And then it's almost part 2 is after that school competition. After you've done whatever you do in history club, if it's just a club experience, celebrate that, make it work for you in your classroom, make it work for your students, and then be aware of those kids with potential. And it's like part 2 to get them to that regional competition and on from there. So those are just some things that I've taken away from it over the years. And also don't forget that sometimes when the kids are trying to find topics, there are 2 things that are kind of important with that. And one is that the kids are interested in their topic. It needs to be something that, even if they have a list they're choosing from, and if they're working in a group, that they work together collaboratively, because number one, they're going to spend a lot of time on it. And number 2, they have prior knowledge. And that prior knowledge is valuable, because you don't want them starting from scratch. They need to kind of have a sense of it. And a lot of times we focus on primary sources. Primary sources are wonderful. They're critical to us making our arguments, which this is a persuasive project. But secondary sources, that's where your librarian can really help you with that, because they really have to have a handle on the context and the secondary sources first. Students, sometimes if they get right into primary sources, then they don't have the frame of reference to really kind of flesh it out. So, and the great thing about that is you have one in your classroom. Usually it's a textbook. So you can kind of start and grow and let the kids get more specific as they kind of get a handle on asking the questions and communicating their thoughts. So those were some things that struck me.
When my kids are exploring possible topics, they do this in their groups. I'll have them individually. All right, what are 2 topics you're interested in? And then present those topics to the rest of your group members and try to sell them on why they should choose your topic. So they might have, this year they'll have 3 people in a group. So each of those, they'll have a total of 6 different topics that they will have discussed and debated within their own group before they make the final selection. And they'll list the pros and cons of each of those topics that are presented. And that has been a very powerful tool. Especially, I recommend letting the kids choose their own topics instead of you assigning them, because that way they can pursue something of their own interests, and they will buy more into this whole NHG process if they're getting to research something that they're passionate about.
And I would say that if you're looking to work with high schoolers, one thing that a lot of my high schoolers have been able to do is take their knowledge they've gained through NHD and apply that to some other areas. So, for example, in 2020, I had two girls and they were doing a group project on suffrage. It was a great year for that. And so one of my students then actually did the scholarship contest that came through the Suffrage Commission, and she got scholarship money from that. She was a winner and got some money from that. And so there's, especially with the high schoolers, more so than middle school, there's definitely ways that you can apply that. NHD also has some cool teacher, sometimes it's teacher only, sometimes it's teacher student programs. So one of my students and I we did the Normandy Scholars Program that the NHD no longer have, but they have other kind of similar programs. So there's some other things like that that are really helpful. And so Ashlyn, that I went to Normandy with, the next year when she came back and did her NHD project, because we had learned so much about that topic, she was then able to pick an aspect of that to focus her NHD project on for the following year. So there's some ways that you can do that and places you can do that, and really good opportunities for the high schoolers particularly to kind of work in different areas and do some different things with that same set of skills or that same body of knowledge. So my kids have been very successful with that. I've been very happy for them.
I think as you're thinking about introducing the whole project to your students, getting them to understand that there has to be an argument in their work, that this is we are encouraging you to argue, because we're not going to spend a whole semester writing encyclopedia entry. You are the historian here, so this is your opportunity to be the person that knows it. And so making sure that they understand they're not just digging through sources to complete a project, they're digging through sources to make a historical argument. And that can help them with navigating their topic choice sometimes too, is this something I'm going to want to spend long enough time on and be able to develop my own voice as a historian? And I think sometimes that helps get kids excited, at least in the middle school classroom. It did. So I think kind of looking at that as an opportunity for kids to grow as, analytical thinkers too, is helpful. Well, if anybody has any other questions, I'm sorry, Becky.
So I was just going to say something that I have my kids do that kind of helps get them excited about this whole process and about becoming the expert. At the beginning of the year, and I'll be doing this Thursday and Friday, I have my kids do an online survey of their multiple intelligences, if you're familiar with Howard Gardner's work. And so the kids learn what their strengths are, and they take that, oh, well, I am a logistical learner, or I'm a spatial relationship learner. I like to learn through music. They take that into those group interviews that I was telling you about, and they will share with others. Well, I am strong in this area. I'm looking for someone who can fill this other skill that I'm not as strong in. So that really helps them identify their strengths and areas where they need to grow themselves, and helps them choose the other students that they can grow with. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
Great idea. Maybe also sharing, thinking about a way that you don't have to take on the entire workload on your own. Because I know both of you have mentioned collaborating with other educators. And I think that's really important just to save your mental space for the year as well, because it can be a lot, And I want to echo what Lisa said earlier. Take as much from this as you want. History Day is History Day. If you were just using the rubric in your classroom, you're still participating in History Day. We would love to know what you're doing with your students. But if you are intending on doing a club, for example, sending the Padlet I shared with you that has the rubrics in it to maybe some ELA teachers that you work collaboratively with, and just say, take a look at this rubric. Is this something you think you might be able to work with? Would you like to do this with me? Or working with drama teachers, working with a tech teacher at your school, so that you are not solely navigating this on your own, and you have multiple people that students can bounce feedback from, because the more feedback they can get, the better their project's going to be.